Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum, ladies and gentlemen. Whenever I talk to the family physicians, generally the meeting is around this time when we are having a lot of dengue cases. And the topic which is assigned to me is generally dengue. But today we are going to talk about something different, and we are going to talk about our brain today. And do you know that we have two brains in our body? So you might be surprised, two brains, maybe I'm talking about two halves of the brain. But let me tell you that we already have one brain placed in our skull, but there's another brain which is placed in our abdominal cavity, and that is our gut. And the brain and the gut, they have a conversation or dialogue with each other throughout the day, and this is what makes a connection between different organs, and this is what creates a harmony between different organs of the body and creates a balance in the function of our human body. My name is Dr. Soumya, and I'm going to talk about the functional gastrointestinal disorders today. And when I talk about functional gastrointestinal disorders, it is important to understand that there is a gut-brain axis, which is a bidirectional communication, and it signals signals from the brain go to the gut, and from the gut they go to the brain. And these messages, they are in the form of a communication network, and they can influence the motor, sensory, and secretory modalities of the GIT, and conversely, and they can influence, GIT can influence brain, and brain can influence GIT. It consists of different systems, but mainly neuroendocrine system, neuroimmune system, and central nervous system, along with enteric nervous system, is involved in this gut-brain axis. So it is very important to understand how this gut-brain axis works. So the gut-brain axis is actually a vicious cycle, and it communicates via three channels: via neurological communication in the form of vagus nerve, via bloodstream, and different types of hormones. There are about 500 million neurons in our intestines. That is why I said that we have a second brain in our body. But the brain consists of about 100 billion of them, which is amount which is double to the neurons which are present in the brain. And this is why there are two brains of the body, the brain in the skull and the brain of gut. They communicate with each other, and the fastest communication between these two is the vagus nerve. It acts as a communication highway between the gut and the brain, and the 80% of the information passing through the vagus nerve, it goes from gut to the brain, which is the main channel, and remaining 20% of it travels from brain to the gut. So it is a two-way communication with major contribution of gut sending messages to the brain. Now, when we talk about these things, we must understand that how they work. Whenever there is gut dysbiosis, which can be in the form of any infection, food poisoning, change in the gut microbiota, by the use of antibiotics, unhealthy diet, or processed food, there is a dysbiosis in the gut, which leads to the signal going to the brain from the gut that there is something wrong. It leads to gut permeability, and it causes leaky gut, and whenever there is leaking from the gut, there is increased risk of pathogenesis because of breakage of the intestinal barrier. The gut becomes angry because it is sensitized, and it reacts in the form of abdominal pain, cramps, bloating, and diarrhea. And there is also heightened pain sensation because the signals to the brain of pain from the gut, they become hypersensitive. And at the same time, the brain anticipates this pain and becomes worried. And this worried mind and brain hypervigilance to symptoms leads to stress and excess of immune response, which leads to a knotted belly-like condition. And this also leads to release of hormones like cortisol and immune response activation, which further increases the gut's hypersensitivity. And this gut sensitivity is felt like an angry, leaky, and a knotted gut by the human being. Now let's find out that what is the connection from brain to the gut. So whenever there is any psychological trauma, emotional distress, or any anxious state or chronic anxiety, then this sensitized brain, which is an anxious brain, it has altered signals, and the pain region and the stress hormones, they become activated. We all know that the stress hormones, cortisol and CRF, when they release, they act on our gut, and in the same way, they act on the gut permeability, making it leaky, and obviously when it is leaky, there is increased risk of pathogens because of the break in the intestinal barrier. Subsequently, there is an activation of immune response and excess of immunity factor production, giving a feeling of knotted belly, and then exacerbation of this gut permeability leads from leaky gut and knotted belly to an irritated gut, which is actually the stress-induced gut permeability. This hypersensitized gut, which is very angry, reacts in the form of having abdominal pain, cramps, bloating, and diarrhea. And this heightened pain sensation, then pain signals goes to the brain, and this leads to heightened anxiety and symptoms which further worsen the situation. So if I'm able to understand and make you understand that for the normal human being, there should be normal functioning brain and a well-balanced gut, because this creates a harmony between the two, and whenever there is dysbiosis or psychological trauma, they affect one another. And the normal functioning brain has a balanced emotional state, it has controlled release of stress hormones, it leads to maintenance of gut barrier integrity, and it reinforces the gut. And this leads to diminished pain cessation and balanced belly. On the other hand, from the gut, if we have a healthy lifestyle, if we eat healthy food, if we do a regular exercise, then there is a balance in the gut microbiota, and these good bacteria, they control the serotonin production, they restore the healthy gut barrier, and these reinforce gut normal functioning, reduces the pain sensation, and gives a feeling of satisfaction and relaxation to the body. So if I'm able to summarize all this, we must understand that there's a bidirectional signaling between the gastrointestinal tract and the brain. And this is regulated not only by neurons, but also by hormones and also at an immunological level. So a healthy CNS function leads to a normal gut physiology, and similarly, a normal gut physiology leads to a healthy CNS function. But if you are in stress or in a form of GI disease, there are alterations not only in your behavior, cognition, emotion, but also increased levels of inflammatory cell mediators and intestinal dysbiosis, and they affect one another in this fashion. Somebody said that a good set of bowels is worth more to a man than any quantity of brains. And this holds so true when I talk to my patients who are all the time distressed because of their abdominal complaints, whether they are in the form of pain, bloating, dyspepsia, diarrhea, constipation, or a feeling of fullness all the time. And it is so frustrating for them that they've forgotten about everything else in their life, but they're only concerned about their gut. So there are some disorders which are known as functional gastrointestinal disorders. These are actually disorders of gut and brain interactions, and the group of conditions, they have a specific characteristic. So these functional disorders, they are grouped into 20 different types, but the most common ones that we are going to address today are functional dyspepsia and irritable bowel syndrome, which you very frequently encounter in your clinical practice. And how this happens, I've already explained that there's altered central nervous system processing. So the brain processes the pain signals from the gut in an altered way. There's intestinal tract hypersensitivity, which have an increased, heightened feeling of pain or discomfort, even from the normal signals. And there are motility disturbances, which can either be a delay or a rapid transit through the gut, resulting in either diarrhea or constipation. And there is reduced mucosal and immune system function, which leads to a leaky gut, which increases the chances of pathogens to develop in your gut. So the functional dyspepsia and irritable bowel syndrome are the two most common functional gastrointestinal disorders, and they often overlap with each other. So the symptoms of functional dyspepsia are more related to the upper stomach and upper small intestine, while the irritable bowel syndrome mainly affects our bowels and the lower intestines. So they overlap in a number of ways. First of all, they may coexist. So many patients with functional dyspepsia also meet the criteria of irritable bowel syndrome. They can be misdiagnosed, and they can be mistakenly misdiagnosed functional dyspepsia as IBS and IBS as functional dyspepsia. And then, very importantly, they have a shared pathophysiology, and because of these disturbances in the gut-brain connection, it is very similar in appearance. And the treatment is also very common because the gut-brain axis communication is which we need to target to treat these patients. And there is a rate of overlap of FD and IBS in a range of 11 to 27%. That means that they can coexist with each other. And please keep in mind that if both of them are present, they lead to more severe symptoms of either of the disease in comparison to if one of them is present alone. Talking about functional dyspepsia, globally about 7 to 45% of population suffers from uninvestigated dyspepsia. And when we talk about Pakistan, there's a study from the Lady Reading Hospital in Peshawar, which quotes that in Pakistan, functional dyspepsia prevalence is about 42.7%. In 75.3% of functional dyspepsia, patients were also diagnosed with having a depressive disorder. Coming on to the risk factors of functional dyspepsia, the use of non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs, Helicobacter pylori infections, a recent infection of gastrointestinal tract like acute gastroenteritis are some of the factors which contribute to this problem. Apart from that, psychological comorbidity, female sex, and smoking are some of the risk factors which have been identified. The symptoms, they are very bothersome and become more prominent in last 3 months. And if the onset of symptoms are more than 6 months, the patient has no structural problem, and it has a normal endoscopy, then we can label these patients as functional dyspepsia. The functional dyspepsia actually presents in the two forms. One is the epigastric pain syndrome, in which patients have an epigastric pain or burning sensation, and the other one is postprandial distress syndrome, in which there is early satiety and a feeling of fullness after eating. And the pathophysiology remains the same, which is the gut-brain axis dysfunction. Coming on to the second part of the functional gastrointestinal disorders, which is the irritable bowel syndrome, which actually is very irritating for doctors as well as patients because they are very difficult to treat. So irritable bowel syndrome is a chronic, relapsing, and often lifelong disorder, and it is characterized by the presence of abdominal pain or discomfort, which may be associated with defecation and is accompanied by change in the bowel habit. And it can present as diarrhea predominant form, constipation predominant form, alternating diarrhea and constipation, or an undifferentiated type. Epidemiology of IBS, if we talk about that, it is about 10 to 20% people suffer from IBS. The incidence is about 1 to 2% per year, and it is more common in the younger age group. It occurs between the age of 15 and 65 and more common in the female population. There is decrease in the reporting frequency among older individuals, and we find typical IBS symptoms in healthy population all the time around us. So the prevalence of IBS in Pakistan has been quoted to be about 33.2. The risk factors are younger age, female sex, previous acute infections, and other functional somatic syndromes have been associated with it. The risk factors which affect the severity include food, GI infections, mucosal inflammations, or life stresses, or poor coping skills, poor social support, and the pathophysiology remains the same, which is the gut-brain axis dysfunction. The hallmarks are chronic or recurrent GI symptoms, which can be abdominal pain, gas, bloating, diarrhea, constipation. And there are scale, Rome-4 criteria is used, but it is important to differentiate between a functional and a structural gastrointestinal disorder, and you need to do all the battery of the tests. So if a patient is young, you do all the tests and consider sigmoidoscopy, stool for occult blood, CBC electrolytes. But if the patient is more than 50 years, you do perform a colonoscopy to rule out other functional disorders. There are some red flags that you need to identify. If your patient is anemic, having fever, persistent diarrhea, rectal bleeding, severe constipation, and weight loss, always think of an alternative diagnosis, especially if there are nocturnal symptoms of pain, if there is family history of GI cancer, inflammatory bowel disease, or celiac disease, and there is new onset of symptoms in a patient more than 50 years of age, be very, very vigilant and think of an alternative diagnosis and rule out this. So this is a diagnosis of exclusion. Once you make the diagnosis, you reassure the patient that this is not an organic disease, but this is something obviously which is worrying them, and there are limited current treatment options which are available. The current management relies on education and reassurance of the patient, doing some dietary modifications, symptomatically treating them, and then psychological or behavioral options. So there are a number of pharmacological agents which are available, including anticholinergics, prokinetics, antispasmodics, 5-HT receptor antagonists, and antidiarrheals. But we need to identify what type of problem patient is suffering. It is diarrhea, constipation, pain which is bothering him, and if there is a dominant tendency of depression and anxiety, and then treat it. I wanted to emphasize over here that the gastrointestinal tract is sensitive to emotion, anger, anxiety, sadness, elation, and we must keep in mind over this. So there are major depressive disorders in functional gastrointestinal disorders. They cannot cause mood disorders, but they are frequently associated with each other, and they can worsen each and other. So there are common mental disorders in IBS, and gastrointestinal effects, they have an effect on the psychology of the patient and the vice versa. The central neuromodulators remain as a very good choice in our patients when treating these patients. I wanted to tell you all that this is a sponsored talk by Scottman Pharmaceutical, and we are going to focus on one of their products which has an excellent result in treating these functional gastrointestinal disorders. And this is a combination of flupentazole, which is 0.5 milligram, and mellitracin, which is about 10 milligram. Flupentazole is a neuroleptic agent with anxiolytic and antidepressant properties, and when it is given in small doses, which is 0.5 milligram, it has a powerful antagonist effect at both D1 and D2 dopamine receptors. And mellitracin is a bipolar thymallopathic mood modifier, and an excellent combination which can be given in many functional disorders, including the functional GI disorders. They have excellent role in functional dyspepsia and IBS, and we've been all using them in our clinical practice with very good results and relief of symptoms by the patients. So let us look at the scientific literature review of this excellent combination of flupentazole and mellitracin. The efficacy and safety in epigastric pain has been studied, and this was a study published in China in which the combination of this drug along with PPI was effective and safe in epigastric pain syndrome. Similarly, in functional dyspepsia, it has been studied, and it is associated with significant improvement in quality of life, independent of the presence of anxiety or depression. It's also being studied in anxiety and depression and in patients of ulcerative colitis who are already on mesalamine. If this is added with mesalafine, it is safe and reliable therapeutic regime, and it improved the clinical efficacy, mental status, and quality of life in patients of ulcerative colitis who have a very disturbing mind because of being anxious and depressed because of their quality of life of repeated visits to the washroom and bleeding. It has also been compared to prothiodine in a randomized double-blind parallel group controlled trial in which it had superiority and better tolerability than prothiodine in treatment of anxiety and depression when it was associated with other comorbid general medical disorders. The dosage and administration I wanted to tell for all the family physicians over here. In adults, it's given usually twice a day, morning and noon. And in severe cases, it could also be 2 tablets in the morning. In elderly patients, it is usually 1 tablet in the morning, and this is also the maintenance dose of this drug. You have to be vigilant about side effects, though they are very rare. It can sometimes cause restlessness, insomnia, and hypomania, but rarely dizziness, tremors, visual disturbances, headache, and hyperprolactinemia is also associated with it. Please do not give it to patients who have immediately recovered from myocardial infarction, who have an untreated narrow-angle glaucoma, who are using barbiturates, opiates, or alcohol, and it should not be given to patients who have received an MAO inhibitor within the last 2 weeks. Thank you very much for your very kind listening. I would take this opportunity to invite all of you to the 6th Pakistan Society of Internal Medicine Annual International Conference, which is going to be held in Movenpick Hotel, Karachi, from 14th to 16th February. We have an excellent lineup of programs with interactive workshops, pharmaceutical exhibitions, state-of-the-art lectures, and poster and presentations both in the oral and in the poster form. Please be part of this academic and networking event and come join us in Karachi. Thank you very much.